Welcome back to our panel discussion, Incident Response in Government, sponsored by Optiv and IBM, here on federalnewsradio.com and Federal News Radio 1500 AM. My guest today, Wally Coggins, Director of the IC Security Coordination Center in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Paul Morris is Chief Information Security Officer and Executive Director of the Information Assurance and Cybersecurity Division at the Transportation Security Administration. Rick Driggers is the Deputy Chief of Operations at the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center at Homeland Security. Ian Doyle is Executive Security Advisor at IBM Federal, and Jeff Wickman is Practice Director for Enterprise Incident Management at Optiv. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And I want to talk about the issue of resilience, because the whole point in many ways for federal cybersecurity is not so much to stop the world from flopping at our doors, so much as to be able to come back and keep going when it does. And that's really what resilience is all about. So how can this idea of orchestration of automated processes in cybersecurity help that bigger issue of resilience?
Right now we're in the midst of moving quickly to cloud environments, as you can imagine. And as we were going through some design in the last couple of weeks, I had yesterday a very senior engineer on our team say we would not have done this unless we weren't thinking about resilience or how we could respond and support you in the SOC. And it really comes down to, you know, we have these tools and we talked about they're owned by different organizations, they're there for a different reason. But as we bring those together to say who needs what when, and it all goes down to can we continue to fight and do our job during an ongoing cyber attack, and that's a different conversation than do you have disaster recovery. So that gets into bringing teams together, bringing tools together, and how we build things. So it's having, I think, a big change on the way we meet these difficult times, and it meets that that story of, you know, if every window and door in your house had a different lock and alarm, and somebody else had all the keys, and you put somebody in there to go fight it, how do you figure they could do that? Well, that really gets into how you do that all together, and that's what orchestration, I think, that keep us up and running and then quickly return for things that just kind of come off.
So that takes the whole idea beyond the database transaction crash model where you had recovery point objective and recovery time objective and all these kinds of metrics, which don't really work very well in an operational environment where you have people there on the front line of real danger.
Absolutely. You have to think about as we get into design, we talk about you know, system authorizations of what is that system individual response plan. If it went down, if you lost, could you quickly restore that data? Could you quickly get that back up? You start looking for different requirements within, you know, how the build and design, and then again we go back and test and audit those things to make sure that they can recover quickly. You're exactly right. It's a different conversation being driven by what happens if we were breached, what happens if you're under attack, and that really starts to define the behavior of the folks that are doing all of those pieces.
Yeah, I completely agree with Paul, and I think, you know, additionally, I think from a mission standpoint, sometimes really the importance of resilience is take, you know, our colleagues in intelligence or forensics, for example, that sometimes the appropriate action is to not take any action because you're trying to collect additional information to see what needs to be done in the future. So in order to do that, you need to have that resilience in place so operations can still keep running, that collection can still keep happening. So this way, you know, in the future, you set yourself up for what needs to happen.
From the in-kick perspective, I'll lift it up a little bit, looking at critical infrastructure protection and resilience across multiple different sectors. If you're looking at the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, 16 critical infrastructure sectors. I think our programs, resilience underpins all of them. We have a national exercise program, cybersecurity exercise program, working with state and locals, working with departments and agencies, international partners, so that we can enhance the cybersecurity posture of those particular state and local entities. We can provide them recommendations. We can help them develop incident response plans and things of that nature. We also have our National Cybersecurity and Technical Services Program, which runs our cyber hygiene program that I talked about earlier, but they also do risk and vulnerability assessments in the private sector, state and local departments and agencies, and they also do high-value asset assessments. And then the information sharing that we do. We put out products out to the public. We put out products that are out to the public, but a certain subset of that public. So we have traffic light protocol, white, amber, green, red, and we share that information so that we can enable network defenders to make their networks, make their ecosystem certainly more resilient, and to raise the level of their cybersecurity posture towards multiple different threats.
All right. Other comments on resiliency? Sure, Wally.
In the intelligence community, the resilience issue has really been driving us to defense in depth. Getting beyond just endpoint security, looking at net flows and individual users and things like that. The other area is redundancy, making sure that you've got the redundancy to provide that resiliency when areas are impacted by cyber events. And then getting at some of the points my colleagues were making, the collaboration between different organizations, making sure that the situational awareness is there, and that information is being shared across, whether it's mitigations, defensive measures, things like that, to increase the response and prevent the activity from spilling over.
Jeff, is that something that, customers say that it's top of their mind?
The entire end game for everything that we really do is to maintain our environments. And that's the whole gist of the automation, orchestration, protection, IR, is to make sure that we can survive a specific type of attack. As we continue, we learn more about different attacks, and attackers are going to always adapt. So it's a zero-sum game. No one's ever going to be in front all the time. There's going to be a breach, and being prepared for it, that's the tough part. And hopefully that allows us to be able to respond effectively when a breach is successful.
All right, let's talk about people, because that's come up several times in the discussion heretofore, and I guess the types of people, the education and training levels that we need in cybersecurity have really evolved a lot in the last couple of years. So how can, in the age of orchestration, then there's certain jobs you don't need, just like, you don't need people. At one time, people had to load tapes on mainframes and thread tape heads and that kind of thing. Those jobs all went away. I think the same thing is true in cyber of the software job. So let's talk about a little bit what you need for human capital and talent in the orchestrated age, if you will.
The folks that we need are what we call low-density, high-demand individuals. They have the expertise in cybersecurity, understand the networks, understand the tools and capabilities that are out there, and are constantly learning, because the threat is always evolving. It's moving really fast. And as the tools take some of the activity away, the more mundane activity and responses, some of the things that we do to keep those folks engaged are developing the working group and technical exchanges that we run throughout the community. We also have them constantly evaluating the tools that we're running today versus what's available to the community, and helping with the deployment of those when decisions are made to move to the next and best thing. And also conducting open source research, trying to stay ahead of the threat and as it's evolving, making sure that we're prepared as new exploits are being used in the wild. And then finally, when we run our exercise programs, we use those individuals to help develop realistic, complex scenarios that will really test the community and help them be prepared for major incidents when they occur.
It's almost as if there's a collegiate or academic quality to some of this work. These
individuals have unique skills. They're highly sought after, not only across the departments and agencies within the federal government, but also the private sector. And so, we have a human resource system in the federal government that's slightly antiquated to be able to recruit, retain, and incentivize these particular individuals to stay. So I know at the Department of Homeland Security, our Chief Human Capital Officer is trying to get very innovative and putting in place new incentives program, as well as a new personnel system to be able to recruit and retain this type of talent. As Wally said, you've got to keep them engaged. You've got to keep them tied to the mission. You've got to keep them excited. You've got to give them opportunities to do training and to grow professionally, and to not have them stagnate in a particular job, but move them around and find opportunities within your organization or within other parts of organizations.
In the time we have left, I want to get to a really important point here too, and that is in some of the new cybersecurity and IT strategy policies that have come with the new administration, there has been a coupling or bridging of the idea of systems modernization, which is widely acknowledged to be a challenge for the federal government, and getting better cybersecurity through modernized systems. So maybe talk about how that can actually happen, where is it that modernization leads to better cyber, or can better cyber and orchestration lead to more efficient ways to modernization?
I'd say it's probably a little bit of both. And I think the modernization piece ties directly back to what we were talking to with the people aspect of it. Because if you have technologies and you have orchestration in place, then it's not so much a matter of not having the right people or enough people, but it's a matter of what can you do to help enable those expertise that you do have and helping elevate their expertise levels based on orchestration processes to actually allow them to do typically what a tier 1 analyst would be doing now, elevating them to a tier 2 because they have some of that orchestration in place that can do additional things and point them in the right directions quicker than what maybe a junior analyst would have been comfortable doing.
Yeah, that's that low density, high demand type of idea.
So I think that security has to be at the front of the line with regards to IT modernization. I think that they have to go hand in hand. You can't do one without the other. Security can't be an afterthought. It's got to be built in. So security by design, we talk about that in the physical world. I think that IT modernization, or even not even just IT modernization as a whole, but even just software updates and things like that you're making to your systems and moving to new operating systems, security has to be a major component of that thought process and planning.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk about ODNI and the whole IC. I mean, probably has state-of-the-art systems, but maybe some old legacy systems too.
The IC has been undertaking for several years now a modernization program to move to shared enterprise infrastructure, modern cloud technologies, common desktops and things like that. And that's clearly been an opportunity for us to improve the security game across the board as these capabilities roll out. They give you an opportunity to know what's being deployed, to deploy modern capabilities and technologies, where with a lot of the legacy systems that are out there, it's hard to know what state they're in. A lot of them are sitting under somebody's desk perhaps without any real understanding of do they have the current patching and things like that going on. So IT modernization is a great opportunity to address the security issue.
I mean, Jeff does asset discovery and the automation of that. It's a big issue just for getting a baseline, but I imagine that also aids that whole idea of making sure that things are secure and then also telling you what it is. Hey, how long has that been there for modernizing?
It gives you an idea of your, the assets that are out there and vulnerabilities that you may be facing. It can expedite the removal of those devices from an environment, or at least set up some type of control around it. If it's something that's critical and can't be updated, can't be patched, can't be released, you can isolate it in other manners so that you can have some sort of resiliency within that system. Stepping back to what everybody has really said is we're going back. We've got to have security from the start, and if you're using third parties to develop software systems, I mean, it really comes down to putting it into contracts that they have to take those things seriously and deploy patches. We're doing an investigation with a company right now, and they're actually being told by their vendors, we're not patching that. Even though it's decimating this network, they're not patching it. So they've got to re-architect their entire network just to protect themselves for that small issue.
Wow, so we've covered a lot of ground today, and I think that's about all the time we have, but I want to thank today's guests for a really interesting discussion and some good points that hopefully people listening in can build on. So let me thank those guests. Wally Coggins is Director of the IC Security Coordination Center in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Paul Morris is Chief Information Security Officer and Executive Director of Information Assurance and Cybersecurity Division at the Transportation Security Administration. Richard Driggers is Deputy Chief of Operations at the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center at the Department of Homeland Security. Ian Doyle is Executive Security Advisor at IBM Federal. And Jeff Wickman, Practice Director for Enterprise Incident Management at Optiv. I'm Tom Temin, Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search Optiv IBM.
On behalf of Federal News Radio, thank you for joining us. A link to the archive session will be sent to you shortly. If you qualified for continuing education credit, you will also receive an email with your training certificate. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.